Hi, I'm Justin Rinaldi, coach of the Fast8 track club, specialising in the 800 metres, and you're listening to the Physical Performance Show.
And the winner is...
Failure is not an option.
I've had my ups and my downs.
I think it's an absolutely breakthrough experience.
Welcome to the Physical Performance Show, the show designed to inspire the pursuit of your physical best performance. I'm your host, Brad Beer. Listen in as we delve into how the world's top physical performers achieve their success, as well as the highs, the lows, and the journey of getting there. Let's get ready, set, let's go. Welcome to the Physical Performance Show, brought to you by Polar's running watches and heart rate monitors, the world leader in heart rate measurement and technology, and also Pogo Physio's online telehealth consultations. I'm Brad Beer, sports physiotherapist and exercise scientist by trade and training, and founder of Pogo Physio. Each week we'll bring you the latest and greatest information and inspiration designed to help you perform at your physical best. And of course, we do this across a range of our different episodes, expert editions, featured performers, coaches' corners, interest editions, and catch-up episodes. And hot off the back of last week's exploration around all things maximising the middle distance runner with Jason Torrey, US-based sports physical therapist and strength and conditioning coach, we've kept the middle distance theme going by chasing down one of the world's hottest middle distance coaches, that is Justin Rinaldi, head coach of the Fast8 track club and coach to Australia's new wave of middle distance, in particular 800 metre superstar athletes, including Peter Bol, Joseph Deng, and a growing stable of other international performers. Now, during today's conversation, you'll hear from Justin around how he became an accidental coach back in 2007, how he's transferred his own athletic success, his highs, lows, and learnings into becoming an effective coach. You see, Justin was the Australian 800 metre champion in 1996 and then again 10 years later in 2006 at 35 years of age. Justin shares around the importance of gauging how well an athlete has recovered from a session, how he manages to juggle coaching some of the world's hottest up-and-coming 800 metre talent alongside a full-time corporate job. Justin shares why it is so important to live and learn by your mistakes. And you'll hear a recap of Justin's reflections on Peter Bol's historic fourth place in the Olympic 800 metre final recently in Tokyo. There is a lot in this Coach's Corner episode. Get your pen and paper ready for the learnings. They'll flow thick and fast. And did I mention that Justin himself has a 1,000 metre PB of 2:18? That's right, 2:18. Let's jump right in. Justin Rinaldi of the Fast8 Track Club, welcome to the Physical Performance Show.
Thanks for having me, Brad. I'm excited to be here.
What a year it has been for the Fast8 Track Club. And I think many people are aware of the success of your athlete, Peter Bol, at the Olympic Games, fourth in the 800 metre final there in Tokyo. But what's not probably so public is that for a coach like yourself who coaches a squad of athletes, whilst there's some celebrating great highs, there's other athletes who, like your Kiwi athlete, Brad Mathers, who was probably dealing with some of the, if not the lowest moment in his athletic career. Can we maybe start there, Justin, with the role of the coach? You celebrate the wins, but at the same time, you're often, consoling and encouraging athletes that have either missed selection or succumbed to injuries such as Brad.
Yeah, I guess when I first started coaching Alex Rowe, early 2000s, like 2010, I had one athlete. So it was quite easy because the athlete either ran well or ran poorly. And now I've got multiple athletes and, I focus on the 800 meters and they're all running the same event, and having them all run well at the same time is probably highly unlikely. It's, the dream as a coach to have everyone run the perfect race at the perfect time. But like you said, there's going to be some times where one athlete runs really well, another athlete gets injured. One athlete's off to the Olympics and one athlete's missed out. And it's really difficult, especially when you're there in front of the athletes, because one athlete's super excited and the other athlete's clearly down the dumps. And you've got to focus your attention to the athlete who's down the dumps and make sure, that they're okay, because the athlete who's run well, they'll look after themselves, naturally, that high will carry them through. But the athletes who are down the dumps, the ones you really got to spend the most time with. And it's probably the most challenging and the one I find the most difficult, to be honest.
It's such a dichotomy, isn't it? Are you at liberty to share? We'll obviously talk about Peter Bol's success, but to share around Brad Mather's journey, your Kiwi athlete who finished 5th in the 2018 Commonwealth Games here on the Gold Coast, Australia. But Brad was seeking to qualify in time and obviously succumbed to injury. Yeah.
So Brad had, you take away the last, 2 races or something, Brad had a really good season. He ran personal bests over 800 metres, ran personal bests over 1,000 metres. He was very consistent. He actually beat Peter Bol in a race in Box Hill when he ran 146.3, and he was going really well. He did everything right. Then we went to Brisbane. His first race, he didn't really commit the way he should have, and I think the first race impacted his second race, but he also picked up a little hamstring niggle, and luckily, he's up there on the Gold Coast and could come in and see you, and you could really help him. And we got him ready for that second race, and then we had one more race to try to get that qualifier, and he hurt his calf, so he didn't have any calf issues whatsoever. You would have picked up on it when you saw him in the clinic. It was just that last stride before the race. We do 2 150s at race pace, 20 minutes before the race. It was just that last one that he did, and he just felt it go, and he knew he was in trouble. He tried to race because it was his last attempt, but he knew he was struggling to walk on it. I think when you have an injury, when you can't walk on it, you're in trouble. But yeah, that was incredibly disappointing because he did everything right. Brad is probably not the most talented in my group. I've got Peter Bol and Joseph Deng have just oozing talent, and they get away with that sometimes. Where Brad does everything right, ticks all, crosses all his T's, dots all his I's, and you want to see those athletes succeed because they put a lot of effort into getting to where they are.
And so how does someone in your position encourage and get an athlete like Brad back up?
Yeah, so I really just focus on everything we did right this year. Apart from that, it's incredibly disappointing to miss the Olympics, and it could be your only chance ever to make Olympics. Some athletes like Jeff Risley make 4 Olympic teams, but some athletes don't have one chance, and I had to make him, refocus him and say, hey, this is the best year you've ever had. We did everything right. And sometimes injuries just happen. You could do everything right and you get an injury, and it might be nothing you can do to prevent that. So sometimes you got to cop it on the chin and say, it's just a bit of bad luck. Let's move on and make sure we don't get in position next year.
So you accentuate the wins from the season, the gains, and the bigger picture. Remind them of that. Former guest of the show just before you, in terms of weeks, Jason Torrey, physical therapist from the US, who shared around maximising the middle distance runner in terms of injury prevention and management, had a great maxim, and that is, by definition, high performance is risky.
Of course, yeah.
It's by definition, it has to be.
Yeah, and I work in a bank, so that's my full-time job. I work for ANZ, and we sort of look at risk, management and making sure you're managing those risks. So you've got to take some risk, but you've got to try to manage them. And that's what you do when you see a physio and you get regular treatment. You don't some athletes just go see a physio or get a massage when they've got a bit of a niggle. But if you go every week, even if there's nothing wrong, you just get that little top up. And then if something does pop up in there, you've got your appointment booked. And that's the way I look at it, because you're always on that fine edge. You can always train and be at 90%. But, if you want to be the best in the world, you've got to be 100, 110%. And sometimes you've got to take risks. But so long as they're calculated and not too risky all the time.
It's the never-ending journey, isn't it? And yourself, Justin, you had quite an amazing track career yourself, dual Australian champion in 1996 for the 800 metres, that is. And then again, 10 years later at 35 years of age, 2006. So much of your coaching, I presume, and I have heard you share with Dane Verve on his podcast, that so much of your prior experience as an athlete has shaped how you view and approach coaching, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think, like in life, you just learn from your mistakes. It doesn't matter whether it's, walking down the street and you trip over that crack again. You learn from these mistakes, and that's what I did in coaching. Not coaching, as an athlete, I was really inquisitive. I asked lots of athletes different questions from around the world. I remember having dinner with Wilson Kipketer, who was a world record holder at the time, and I was asking about his training. He wouldn't tell me a thing. I just kept on asking me, I said, "You're going for a run tomorrow. How fast do you do your runs?" And then I saw him at, 12 months later and he's laughing because he remembered this conversation. But I think all those lessons I learned from when I was an athlete, the good stuff and probably the bad stuff I did, I've taken into my coaching. I think it makes me a better coach. And I'm always learning too. I ask questions. I listen to podcasts. I was listening to your podcast with the Olympic triathlon gold medalist, just listening to things about, how he adjusted his seat, 1.5 centimeters, brought it forward to prevent hamstring injuries and stuff like that. So he's using his quads more. Just things like that. It's probably got nothing to do with athletics, but just the way people think about things makes me think about what I could do in my coaching to find a 1.5 centimeter improvement.
It does seem to be a common characteristic of, I believe, not only just coaches, but also great athletes, is that endless thirst for knowledge and constantly learning. I heard you reference that athlete manager, James Templeton, who obviously works with some of your squad, that James was prior managing world record holder David Rudisha in the 800 metres across most of his career, and the likes of Bernard Lagat, and that you would pester James, maybe not pester, pester's maybe not the right word, but you would ask James,
pester.
It was pestering about David Rudisha's training principles and practices. What did you glean from those conversations, Justin?
Yeah, so it's actually before he had Rudisha, there was another athlete, Kimitai, who ran 142. This is back in the late 90s, probably 98, 99. And I found an email that I sent to James just asking questions about what Kimitai does for training, because I was just interested. And then, I've had that sort of connection with James all along, and just by chance now he manages two of my athletes. But it's also good having James because, I get excited when I've got an athlete running 144, and then James had an athlete that, around 140. So it keeps me in check. It's kind of good. I get really excited. It's kind of like, James, like, oh yeah, I've seen this before. I've had, 8 athletes run quicker than that JR. It's like, oh, okay, thanks, James. But yeah, James is a wealth of knowledge, and I think we've got a similar mindset. We sort of agree on, well, he always agrees with the stuff I'm doing in training, which makes it really good. I think if you had a manager who sort of disagreed, it'd be difficult, between myself, the manager, and the athlete to get that same message going across.
Tell me, JR, the demands of 800-metre running are just so unique. Jason Torrey, on the episode prior to yours, shared that there's these subcategories of 800-metre runners or middle distance runners, the runner that can run up from, say, 400 metres, or the runner that can run down from, say, 1,500 metres to an 8, or the natural-born 800-metre runner. What do you see and what do you observe as what makes the best 800-metre runner? It just seems to be so variable.
Yeah, it is. I think a classic example, if you go back and watch, Pete raced in Luzerne 2-3 nights ago, and he was sharing a lane with Marco Arop from Canada, and they both got Sudanese background, but they're different parts of Sudan. And Marco is like 6'3" and built not like a bodybuilder, but he's strong. And Pete's 5'10" and 61 kilos. And just looking at those two athletes stand side by side, you couldn't imagine they're both about to run the same event. But they're very similar. They're both from 143, 144, and they're both competitive, but they look completely different athletes. And I think that's what's one of the beauties and also one of the frustrating parts about the 800 is that there is so many different ways to tackle it, 400, 800, 800, 1,500, or pure 800, and multiple sizes. You've got someone like Joe and Pete who weigh 61 kilos, or you've got someone like Brad Mathis who weighs 76 kilos and quite strong. But they all doing the same event, running the same race, sharing the same lane. It's just an amazing event. And I think that's why I'm so passionate about it, because there's no right or wrong way. Well, it might be a wrong way to tackle it, but finding the right way to tackle it is the good mathematical equation that I like to try to figure out.
And it's a great lead into training principles for the 800 metre, Justin. You've got runners in your squad such as freshly joined Jeff Risley, who I believe joined the squad in October 2020 or thereabouts, who has historically always been quite a high volume runner. And then the likes of Joseph Deng and Peter Bol, who it's well known maybe run 50 to 60 kilometres a week fairly consistently across a year. How do you navigate this? That's complex.
Yeah, it is tricky, and athletes get set in the way. So Jeff was, even Luke Matthews, who's recently joined the group, they come from the higher end of doing 120, 130 kilometres a week. And like you said, Pete and Joe do 50, 60. But again, going back to when I was an athlete, when I ran 3 minutes 40, 1,500, I was running 40. I think I had the max week I did that year was 47 kilometres. But then I started coaching myself, and I remember in 2002, I wanted to win the Commonwealth Games, and I had a 16-week period where I ran 160 Ks a week. So I know exactly what it feels like to do the 40 or 50 Ks a week and what it feels like to do 160 Ks a week. So I can use my experience then and saying, well, if you just pull back on this, because 160 Ks a week was probably a little bit too much, but you pull back on this, you get more benefits doing this, and we can add a bit more here. But it is a good challenge to figure out what's the best for each athlete.
Would you agree? It requires courage at times to try and find that minimally effective dose. It can be a scary thing to reduce people's workload.
Yeah, and I think it comes back again to that risk management, injury prevention. In my head, when I was coaching Alex Rowe and then Peter and Joe, I thought about what is the least amount of volume I can do to get the best result. Because in my head, I thought, well, we're minimising the amount of time they're running. It doesn't matter whether they're running fast or slow. It's still contact on the ground. If I minimise that, then am I lessening my chance of getting injured and, getting those overuse injuries like a stress fracture and stuff like that? Of course, we do some high-intensity stuff, and that could lead to stress fractures. But again, it's just that risk, find that right balance. What's the least amount I can do to get the best result out of an athlete?
It's just trial and error, right?
100%. Yeah. Like I've probably said in multiple podcasts, everything I do is I've either done it myself or stolen off another group. And when I'm still learning, I have not got the best 800-meter program until I coach a world record holder. I'll keep on trying to learn. And even then I'll keep learning. But it's trial and error. Each year we make small changes. And hopefully they're the right changes. You
did mention at the top of the show here, Justin, that you are a full-time team member of ANZ Bank Australia. This, I don't think it should be overlooked that this is a serious passion side project at quite an exceptional level for you, which really is quite astounding. How do you personally manage your own resources to make this work? Because high-performance coaching, once again, by definition, is time consuming.
It is. And it's not only the time you spend out there with the athletes, it's the time you spend thinking about it. And just, like we said, thinking about how you can change the program. But I like it because I've got my work hours, and I work from 8 till 5 most day, well, Monday to Friday. And then I can switch off from work and go to training and start thinking about that. And it actually is good because it allows me to stop thinking about work, where a lot of people might take that work home and start thinking about it. Of course, there's some nights where there's some things going on at work that are on your mind, but for a majority, I switch off and think about the coaching and everything's focused on that coaching. And then I come home and think about my family. So it's good to help compartmentalize things like that. But could I be a better coach if I was a full-time coach? I'd like to think so. But for now, you just make things, you make work what you've got available to you.
Well, I certainly know your athletes love you and they can, and your efforts, they appreciate the efforts. And Peter Bol's freshly launched podcast, In My Spikes, where he interviews you on episode 3. He mentions that you're now adjusting to having just welcomed at this time of this recording, a 3-month-old son into the world. So there's another layer of figuring resources out.
Yeah, again, and again, I'm just trial and error. I have no idea what I'm doing. YouTubing videos and what I'm supposed to do. But again, yeah, it's amazing, and probably a lot more responsibility looking after a 3-month-old than looking after an elite athlete. But again, I put the same dedication in to make sure I do the best job I can do.
Yeah, I think we get a sense of that, Justin. Anything you do with full intent. Training principles or general ingredients in a typical training block or week. How does that look for the Fast8 track club athletes? Justin, it's a broad question, I appreciate.
Yeah. And, typically we'd do, and I've probably said this multiple times on podcasts, but we have a focus on max speed all year round. And by speed, I know some athletes say speed work and they might mean speed endurance or doing a few strides. When I mean speed work, I mean, running between 30 to 50 meters as fast as you can and then having a long rest. So we do that, we do a number of drills and do a long warm up, and then we go straight into those really fast sprinting. And we do that year round. So I believe that if you're doing something year round, then you lessen your chance of getting injured. I know a lot of athletes sort of throw in some speed work towards the end of the year and they hurt their hamstring or do something, and then they shy away from it for the rest of their career because they think, last time I did speed work, I got injured, which is natural to think. But I think if you're doing it all year round, you lessen your chance of getting injured, and also you're getting better. And then we also focus on, an endurance type session each Saturday. It might be sort of 6 to 8K worth of volume. And it's sort of at that VO2 max, 3K to 5K sort of pace work that we do. And we just try to get that better each each time we do it. So they're the two sort of like cornerstones I have in my training program. And then the rest we sort of just change in between, as if you're in winter, you might do a bit more sort of longer work, and then in summer you do some 800 meter pace stuff. But I think if you're going well at your speed end and well at your endurance end, then the middle bit's easy to fix.
So there's a lot there. So there's those two key overarching aims, the focus on max speed plus the maintenance of endurance abilities across a year, and then manipulating the other training sessions through the week depending on time of year, season, upcoming events, everything else.
Yeah, and that's pretty much. I think a lot of people, tend to look at training as a pyramid, and they have this massive base and then build up to a peak. I like to think of more of a box or a house where you've got two strong foundations in terms of speed and endurance, and then you build on that. So it's similar principle, but I don't work into a peak. I sort of just keep on building on it and make each component better and better. Hopefully, that's the goal.
That's a nice visual, the base, speed and endurance. I asked Jason Torrey on the prior expert edition US-based physical therapist there working in middle distance, his view of how polarized training approach fits into middle distance. And his response was, well, it depends on whether that's looking at the number of sessions or the percentage of time in zone, and that percentage of time in zone might look like 90-10 or 85-15. I mean, it's a very tough and broad question, but anything you'd add to that, Justin, from working with your athletes?
Yeah, it's kind of, I typically, I keep good records of all the training, but I actually don't add up the mileage they do each week and I tend to use it more as a feel of how they're going and look at them, how they're recovering from each session. And that's when I know whether to add more or take away more. If an athlete's looking a bit tired as they're warming up, you just pull back on the session. If the athlete's looking, like they're, and vice versa, when an athlete's looking really good in the training session and looks like they're flying, you might pull back on even on that. I remember a session that Peter and Joe did before Nationals 2020. They got cancelled because of COVID. But we had this planned session and they were running it so well that I cut the session 2 reps short because I didn't think I could get anything more out of the session. And I thought that might risk an injury because they were going so well. So I think sometimes you've got to just be there and be present at the session and be brave enough to pull back when you think things are going well, and know when you need to push a little bit more.
Be brave enough to pull back when things are going well, and also know when to push more. Gosh, that's an art and a science.
Yeah, it is, exactly. And I think that's learning from the mistakes I made, because I think when I was coaching myself towards the end there, I'd keep pushing and pushing because you think pushing is better. The more you do, the better you're going to be. But yeah, sometimes doing less is better.
Yeah, gosh, how many mountains do we have to go around to learn that lesson?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, and I think it's a lesson. It's best learned on yourself, I think, because you hit your head with a hammer. It's like, yeah, that hurts. Actually, I'm not going to do that again.
Yeah, totally. Whether you're a practitioner or a coach, here. Justin, you just mentioned that gauging how an athlete's recovered from sessions or the workload is key. What things do you look at as a coach to gauge whether an athlete is recovering well or whether they're not?
Yeah, so the key for me is even just the demeanour they turn up at the session. So sometimes you can see an athlete walk in, their shoulders might be slightly down, or they're not, talking as much as they normally do. They're just not looking as happy as they normally do. That's, to me, something could be going on outside of the training, but they could be a bit flat. Also, just watching them warm up and do their strides, you can see when athletes sort of got their hips up, they're bouncing off the track, they're looking great. Sometimes an athlete looks a little bit flat and tired, and then you just got to make sure you tell them to pull back on the session. It is hard because even though I think athletics is an individual sport, when you're training in group, I try to get the guys to work together as much as possible. So you just got to be smart and tell them just to back off a little bit and not, this is your paces, stick to your pace, don't go their pace. So that's when you've got to be smart and do that kind of stuff. So
it's using those visual cues, the Stephen Seiler famed exercise physiologist test, which I think he referred to as the hair in the cereal test. How scientific. And as you say, the demeanour, we all know when people just aren't themselves, and I think that's a key. Yeah. That's a key telltale sign, whether it's a psychological unseen stressor or a it's hard to differentiate, or a physiological stress just from fatigue, accumulated fatigue.
100%. I mean, it goes the same in the workplace when one of your staff members turns up to the office. I mean, it's harder now when we're all working from home and everything's via Zoom. But back in the days when we were in the office, I got some large teams of 130 staff. But you can see just individually when they walk in how they're going to perform that day, and that's what I love about coaching and working with people. Is just getting that interaction with them and seeing, making a quick judgment. You're not right today. What's going on? So sometimes you get it wrong.
we learn from our mistakes, a wise man said, Justin. Just curious, your work colleagues must, what do they make of your coaching success? They must be pretty proud of their teammate, plus also amazed on how you managed to coach at such a high level, plus hold down a very high level corporate role.
Yeah, I think the press that Peter Bol was getting during the Olympics sort of rose my stakes at work, because everyone knew that I coached, but I didn't think they really. I don't talk about it a lot at work, about my coaching, so I don't think they knew the level that I coach at. They knew I coached and the athletes were good runners, but I didn't think they didn't know they were that level. So I think now there's a bit more interest in what I'm doing outside of work. Yeah, and it's all just because of the press that Peter was getting more than anything. But yeah, it's been good.
You're listening to Justin Rinaldi, head coach of the Fast8 Track Club, on this Coach's Corner episode brought to you by Polar's running watches and heart rate monitors. Now, as you know, the Physical Performance Show is here to help inspire your physical best performance, and we couldn't be more excited to announce our new show sponsor, Polar. Polar are a sports technology company who build world-class running watches and heart rate monitors for people who take their run programming, performance and recovery seriously. Polar have an incredible heritage. Headquartered in Finland, they have been the global driving force behind scientific wearables for 4 decades. They are the pioneers in and the world leaders in heart rate measurement technology. Coming from the heart of the Nordics, they have the history of quality and design innovation, which is unparalleled. Worn by some of the best athletes on the planet, Polar's running watches enable you to design and build a running program in seconds, alongside with a guided strength, core and mobility plan to build a stronger runner. Each day's running plan drops onto your Polar watch, so your coach is right there with you, helping you get the most out of each session. From there, you can run to heart rate, pace, running power, as well as manage your training load, VO2 max, and so much more. Now, the team at Polar are offering up to 15% off, so if it's time for you to check out your new running watch or heart rate monitor, then jump over to polar.com and use the code TPPS on selected products. Support for today's show also comes from the Physical Performance Show's Learnings membership. From just $5 per month, you can support the production of the Physical Performance Show. In return, we'll grant you access complimentary to our back catalogue of live stream events, including 2020's very popular live streams with Dr. Shona Halson on all things optimizing recovery and Dr. Stephen Seiler on all things polarized training. You'll also receive complimentary access to all upcoming live streams, including October's live stream event with UK-based author and sports dietitian Rinnie McGregor, Fueling the Endurance Athlete. If you'd like to become a Physical Performance Show Learnings member, jump over to patreon.com and simply search the Physical Performance Show. And of course, support for today's show comes from Pogo Physio's online telehealth consultations. If you are a runner or endurance athlete struggling with bone stress injuries, tendon-related concerns, or joint concerns, then our 45-minute online telehealth consultations can serve as an effective means to get you back to your physical best. To schedule your appointment, jump over to pogophysio.com.au/telehealth or drop me an email over at b.beer@pogophysio.com.au. For now, let's jump back with this week's featured guest on this Coach's Corner episode, Justin Rinaldi of the Fast8 Track Club, dispensing many learnings from his coaching and athletic career to date.
Just still working through some training principles here, Justin. Strength and conditioning is key for your athletes. And I also heard you cite with Peter Bol on the In My Spikes podcast there that one of the additions that you encourage was the athletes to take on some Pilates. So can you speak just to strength and conditioning / Pilates and how that fits into your program?
Yeah, 100% strength conditioning is a major part of the program. I don't take a hands-on approach, maybe with Brad Mathis a little bit, because we go to the same gym and Brad hasn't got the same funding or sort of support that some of the other athletes do. So I might take a bit more hands-on approach with his strength and conditioning program. But typically I'd leave it to a strength and conditioning expert. So someone at the VIS, for example, would do that. And, as long as the athletes are turning up to the session and they're not tired from what they've done in the gym, of course, there's going to be certain times when you have to get tired from doing stuff in the gym, but the running takes priority, and the gym sort of supporting aspect of the running. Then I'm happy to keep it, hands off and say that's fine. I trust what you're doing. And then the Pilates, I just think was another key ingredient, because it's a lot of core strength. It's also good for your flexibility. I think it's also good just to learn some patience, and do the movements, which I spoke about. I tried Pilates and I'm not very good at that. Slow, concentrated movements. I'm more, ballistic sort of movements, Olympic lifts and stuff like that. But I think it's good to learn patience and learn to control your breathing and work through a movement and understand how your body reacts under a slow tension and stuff like that.
That's a great insight, and also just that ability to know where your joints are in space. There's such great proprioceptive feedback from the clinical or the Pilates as well. So it's a great inclusion. Tapering for your athletes, Justin. How do you determine how to get an athlete ready for a major competition? Because they're all going to be different, right?
Yeah, and I don't know whether it's a bit of luck or it's just from my years of running, but I believe that the tapering part of my program is what I do best and what I seem to get, majority of the time right. From ever since, I was coaching Alex Rowe, when he went to his first World Championships in 2013, he ran close to his PB in the heat and the semi and performed really well. Brad Mathis went to the Commonwealth Games in 2018, ran a PB in the heat, PB in the final. Joe Deng ran close to his PB in the heat at the Commonwealth Games, and then we saw Pete go to the Olympics this year and run, a national record of the heat, a national record in a semi-final. So I believe that I get this peak really well. And again, it's just making small changes in the program and knowing when to pull back rather than pushing too much. I think when you get close to a major championship, I think a lot of other programs might add the speed work in at that part of the program, and then you risk injury. I think because we do it year round, it's not something I have to worry about. I don't think about, I've got to get my athletes fast. They're about to go to a major championship. I know they're fast and I know they're strong. So I just got to back off on things and they naturally perform well. So yeah, I think that's what I do well in my program.
And that prior mentioned attention to dialing up or dialing down is just more heightened coming into a major competition.
Yeah, 100%. And, I think it's kind of tricky, and that's what I find the most stressful part of not being a full-time coach and having a job, because I'm not there at the major championships. I'm not there watching the athletes and making sure they're not pushing it too hard. I remember in 2014, Alex Rowe was in amazing shape. He equaled the national record around 144.40. I sent him a session to do, but in the back of his head, he wanted to show the coaches there that he was really fast and could make that 4x4 team. And so instead of hitting the times that I prescribed for the session, he went a little bit quicker, actually went a lot quicker, and tore his hamstring and didn't run, didn't even get on the start line of the Commonwealth Games. And I believed he could have won a medal, definitely won a medal there behind Rhodesia and Nigel Amos. But just not being there and not seeing him and saying, hey, we'll slow down, you're going too quick, don't go any quicker, would have made a massive difference in his career, because he would have, probably gone on and won a medal there, and then sponsorship would have opened up after there. So I think that's the one thing I struggle with, not being a full-time coach, is not being there at those major championships and having my eyes on it. But like you said before, James Templeton's been great, and he's able to be there in Europe and be my eyes and ears and be that, be there to watch out on these things, which is great.
Might we see you at major championships for, say, Eugene 2022, Commonwealth Games, Birmingham 2022, Paris 2024, given that you'll most likely or potentially will have several athletes, perhaps with a quota of Australian 800-metre runners, 3 running from your squad, or is it the demands of work and family and everything else?
I think, it's just balancing those things, to be honest. I think in the past I've sort of thought, well, I've only got, say, 4 weeks off work that I can play with. Where is that 4 weeks best spent? Is it going to Europe, in the lead up to these major championships and making sure we get that right, and then trusting that when they go there, they'll do things right? Is that more important? So it's always trying to find that balance. Ideally, Eugene, I'd take 8 weeks off work and spend those 8 weeks with the athletes, and same with Paris. But yeah, COVID pending, hopefully we go back to a COVID normal lifestyle, and then I can travel over. I would have gone to Tokyo this year. It was just would have been tricky with that 2 weeks quarantine coming home. So I would have been away from my family for 5 weeks, which is tough when you've got a 3-month-old.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. And certainly, I'm sure you weren't the only coach sidelined by COVID for the 2021 Olympic Games. Mindset, Justin, you've shared there, one of your philosophies, live and learn by your mistakes. And I've also heard you reference that athletes ideally will go all in, that they will not have a plan B. It's all in. I heard you cite on the Run Culture podcast there, you don't want to get to 35 or 40 and regret not going all in. I've shared with quite a few people that when I turned 40 last year, I had an internal midlife crisis where I realized that I may never have won an Olympic medal, but my cycling / triathlon, whatever potential was there, I never can look back and see what that was now. And that's, for me, that was personally disappointing. I think it might be partly a male thing as well, but it's hugely disappointing. But this is a message that I share with athletes in the consult room often is do what you need to do to make sure you fulfill your potential. And until you know that you've explored that, don't stop, don't look back, just keep going. How do you engender this message in your athletes? Because it's tough, right? Track and field, sometimes it requires a breakthrough before funding starts flowing or sponsorship opens up. These aren't sports in Australia, unfortunately, where there's often a lot of cash for the athletes to support them.
Yeah. And, I know from a triathlon background, and probably a lot of your listeners are triathletes and they're listening to this, and they'd probably understand the amount of money they fork out for their equipment for triathlon, and also the coaching, their swim coach, and they might have one coach doing everything, but coaching is quite expensive in the triathlon world. Whereas you come to athletics, we don't earn a lot of money or any money, and I don't charge my athletes 1 cent for my coaching. So I turn up to training every day for free and show that dedication that I'm there for them every day. And I expect my athletes to do the same. If they turn up, no one's paying each other, no one's forcing you to be here. But when you do turn up, you turn up and you give the best effort you can give. And like you said, the best athletes in the world don't have a plan B. They throw everything into this. And I think it's the same with anything in life, whether it's business, running a physio, anything. If you throw everything into it and give it 100%, you can never have a regret because you've tried everything. And if it fails, it fails. Mm-hmm. But I think when you're hedging your bets and you say, well, I'm going to spend 50% of my time doing this and 50% of my time doing that, but I want to be good at both. I don't think maybe a very few people in the world can do that. But generally, it's the people who throw everything into it are the most successful.
Yeah, I know your former Australian record holder there, Alex Rowe, who you've mentioned there several times, the first athlete you took on for coaching. He was at one point juggling his medical studies with running, and it didn't see him get the best out of himself on the track.
Yeah, and like you said, it is hard. These athletes don't earn a lot of money, and it's hard to stay in the sport when you're not earning money. And you've clearly got talents in the medical field like Alex did, where and I'm not saying he did it just for money, no. But it's hard to find that balance. And I can understand, and I see he was getting pulled in both directions. As much as it frustrated me, because like I said, I was all in for the coaching and I wanted him to be all in for the athletics. But I understand why he made the decisions he made. Does it still upset me? Probably, yeah, deep down inside, because I think he could have been a lot better than he was. Similar to Pete and Joe, I believed Alex could have been a top 10 runner and could have, run really well in the 2016 Olympics. But, he can't have that time back again. But he'll go on to do things in the medical world that's probably far more important than running 2 laps of the track. So where do you find that balance?
Yeah, I guess, it's an individual question everyone needs to ask of themselves, isn't it? But It does take courage to stay the course, particularly when you're not on a multi-million-dollar salary every year, perhaps like some footballers. It takes courage to stay the course when the tendency, particularly with social media, is compare and despair, right? You can see, I know I fell into that with my own junior triathlon. I could see people moving on and I'm like, well, I'm going to miss the boat. It was an anxiety thing for me, but it's very tough, right, for people to stay in their lane and stay focused.
Agree. And but I think it's important as a coach to be realistic with your athletes. If you've got an athlete that may not be the most talented and is saying they want to break the world record, for example, and you know that they can't, you've got to be honest with the athlete and say, because you don't want to just pump their tyres up and set them up to fail. So you've got to be realistic on what they can achieve and say, that's great, this is how we can work there. And I've never stopped an athlete from believing what they can do, but I've always been realistic and said, well, let's take progression and get there. And this is what I believe you can achieve. And also athletes, got to point them in the right direction. Going back to Alex Rowe, he had a girlfriend at the time, Grace Brown, who asked me to coach her because she kept on getting injured. She was a 1,500 metre runner. But when I looked at her, and I've got no cycling background whatsoever, when I looked at her, she looked like a cyclist to me. She had the build of a cyclist. And so I said, look, I think I can coach you to run this time, which is competitive in Australia, but I can never coach you to make an Olympic final. I don't believe you can with your ability. But I think you can be a great cyclist. You should give that a try. And she didn't want to do that, but eventually she went that path, and she just finished fourth in the Olympics in the cycling, and she's one of the top cyclists in Australia. And so she fell in love with the sport. So she loved running. But I said to her, don't worry, if you're good at this sport, you'll fall in love with it. No one doesn't like being the best of all at something, surely. So you've got to be brave as a coach to point people in the right direction and say, hey, look, you can be good, but you can be great over here. So maybe follow that path.
So that's a great example of transparency and honesty, which I don't think you can have any true relationships built without that. It can take courage in sharing things like that, though. But what are the other hallmarks of the Fast8 track club's culture? Justin, what are the sort of pillars it's built on?
Yeah, I think we're all working together towards a common goal, and that's to run 2 laps of the track as fast as we can. We'd like to have a lot of fun. We're inclusive, so if someone wants to come along and join in with the group, that's fine. And we like to share what we do, so we post all our sessions on, social media and stuff like that. Yeah. We have no secrets. Like I said, everything I've done is probably borrowed or stolen from another coach. So it's not a secret. I share that with everyone, because if someone can learn something from what I'm doing, that's just what I've done with everyone else. So I share everything with everyone, and happy to do that.
And your channels are great follows over on social. We'll shout out to those now: Twitter and Instagram. Fast8, FAST8, the numeric. You can help me here, Justin. What is it? I've got it written down.
Fast8, the number 8 track club. Yeah. So it's pretty easy to remember. Yeah, it's just as simple as running a Fast 800. So it's probably a very boring name, but
I think it's powerful.
We're not in the marketing business.
I actually really like the Fast8 Track Club logo. It's 2 tracks intersecting. I think that's actually very, very clever.
My T-shirt. That's right.
Look at that.
Yeah, that's probably the only artistic thing we've ever come up with is two laps of the track, and it's 800. So it's actually quite clever, but
it's very clever, and it's shaped like an 8. Absolutely brilliant. Justin, are there any other maxims or coaching things you often hear yourself say to your athletes routinely?
Well, it's funny. Well, I was on a run this morning with Brad Mathis. We spoke about him before, and I was doing a section of his run, 10K of his 17K run. And we're just talking about my coaching style. And it's not, I don't lavish a lot of praise on athletes. Like I said, I expect you to turn up to the session and do it well. So I'm not there saying, you did a great job today. Well done. I don't pump the tires up. It's probably one of my things is that if I do give you praise, you've done something really well. And I don't think the athletes crave that sort of recognition, but I think they appreciate it once they do get it, that they know they've actually done a really good job.
So how would you summarize that? It would be not tough love. It's I guess not pumping the tires up unnecessarily, I guess, which isn't sincere, right?
Yeah, true. Yeah, I'm just honest with the athletes. I set the session because I believe they can achieve that and hit those times. And if they do it, they've just done what I've told them to do. So, what's the point of jumping up and down about it?
Justin, we've seen a trend in worldwide sports towards masters athletes still being competitive, whether it's surfing or look at Nick Willis at I believe it was his 5th Olympic Games there in Tokyo, middle distance runner Nick. What might be the sweet spot for an 800 metre runner in terms of age brackets?
Yeah, and I think we talked about earlier about training load. I think you just got to look at the number of years you've been in the sport. If someone's come up through little athletics and started when they were 7, 8, 9, and they've done running all the way through, they might peak a little bit early, in the early 20s. Get someone like Peter Bol, who went to, high school on a basketball scholarship and then fell into the sport, when he was 17. He's only been in the sport for a short amount of time, 10 years. So he could peak a little bit later. So I think the sweet spot, you'd probably say 25. I think you look at the average world record holder, it's around about that 23 years old, 22 to 23. Again, it's tricky because, I've had a number of Kenyan world record holders, and sometimes their date of birth may or may not be correct. So they might, push that age a little bit down. But I think 25, you can run well. But having said that, like we know, there's more money in the sport now and there's more incentive to stay in the sport longer. And we see these athletes like Nick Willis still running well, and Jeff Rice is still running well when they're 34 to 38. And I think it's sort of an old mindset that when you're that old, you can't run well, because I think back in the days, like 60s and 70s, people would have run to their 22 and then got a job because they had to support their self and their family. And so we just thought that's when athletes peaked. I think now we're seeing that you can actually hold that peak for a lot longer. And barring injury, you can still run quite well in your mid-30s to late 30s.
You're listening to Justin Rinaldi on this Coach's Corner episode, head coach of the Fast8 Track Club. If you missed last week's episode, it featured US-based sports physical therapist and strength and conditioning coach Jason Torrey, who shared around all things maximising the middle distance runner. Now, this is a double header alongside today's episode with Justin Rinaldi. It's been very popular amongst practitioners, coaches and athletes themselves. Here's a little snippet of Jason's sharings from last week's episode.
The interesting thing is we don't really know what the shortest distance that those super shoes do help with. What World Athletics did is basically say, hey, you're not going to use those on the track. So they put a stack height limit on their track spikes, which prevented those super shoes from getting into the middle distance realm. Other than maybe some private labs that have tested it, we just don't know what those large high stack super shoes would do in, say, an 800 and a 1500 race.
To enjoy the full episode, jump over to wherever it is that you enjoy the Physical Performance Show from. We're now found also on YouTube. Whilst there, peruse the archives dating right back to episode 1, featuring surf lifesaving Ironman champion Ali Day. For now, let's jump back with this week's featured guest, Justin Rinaldi of the Fast8 Track Club, on this Coach's Corner episode. Justin, it's been several weeks since the final of the 800 metres there in Tokyo 2020/21, where Peter Bol obviously ran to a 4th place in the final, was leading for circa 650 metres, running courageously off the front. I've heard you say you probably wouldn't do anything different on reflection, but there is a differential between running for a medal versus running for the win, and Peter was running for the win. What are your reflections several weeks on now? I know at the time it was bittersweet. There was obviously a sense of satisfaction, but also a deep sense of dissatisfaction being so close to an Olympic medal.
Yeah, and it is still bittersweet. And like I said numerous times, I'm probably going to think about it for the next 3 years. But hand on heart, we went to try to win that race. I know a lot of athletes say they're going to Olympics to win, but when you watch them race, it doesn't matter, or compete, whether it's a triathlon, athletics, swimming, do they actually race to win, or are they just racing and then the result, it just happens? Where I think the plan we had for Peter was the only way that he could have won that race. I think if we ran a different way, he could have snuck a medal and we could have come away as a bronze medalist, for example. But the only way he was going to win that race was to run the way we did. And it didn't work, but we definitely ran to win an Olympic gold medal. And I think that's what we need to be proud of and keep on reminding ourselves that we did that.
Peter's had a big season. I don't think many of his newfound fans and followers probably have that context that he started in February trying to lay down a qualifier just to get to Tokyo.
Yeah, and it's hard because, he was chasing that time, and it's hard because we didn't have Joseph running this year. I think when there was 2 of them together pushing each other up front, they would have got that time earlier, but because Pete was sort of a bit ahead of everyone else this year. He was out there in front, so, typically you'd have a pacemaker for the first 400, then you have to run that last 400 by himself. And I think the second race in Canberra, he missed the qualifier by 2 or 3 hundredths. And then that pressure was on to always get that time, chase that time. And I think it was good once we finished the Australian domestic season. We had that sort of 6 to 8 weeks of training before we started competing again. We sort of focused on just competing and not really chasing time, just letting the time come rather than chase it. And then, conversely, the results picked up and he was getting qualifiers left, right and centre. So it was amazing.
Yeah, gosh. And then in more recent weeks, Peter's just last night finished 4th in the Paris Diamond League, and then a week or so earlier took out the win in Poland in a invitational meet there, actually beating the bronze medalist from Tokyo. So that was, I think, his 18th, or he's now done 18 800s in a season. Wow.
Yeah, it's been a long season. I remember looking at his 2016 and 2017 seasons, and he ran 7 800s in both those years. And one of my notes on, I kept little notes. One of the notes is needs to race more. So we've probably done a little bit too much racing this year. But the good thing is he's got through all those races and he's got no niggles. Like the previous years, I think 2019 had this little groin niggle. He's had some shin issues in the past, so he's got no niggles. So that's probably the most pleasing thing to end the season like this, to get through without any injuries, is amazing.
What might an off season look like for Peter Bol or any of your athletes after such a big season?
It's typically we take 2 to 4 weeks completely off, and then they start back with some easy running. It's really difficult for us in Australia because we have our domestic season and then the European summer, and there's not a long turnaround time before they have to start competing again. So Pete, is finished now. If he takes 4 weeks off, it's October, for example, and then we've got to start racing again in January. So there's not a lot of time to do another preparation for that. So what we'll do is probably for Pete is pull back that and maybe not start racing until late February, March this year, just to give him more time to recover and, get his mind right again, because it's hard to be up for that, that long period of time.
Totally. And get hungry again and watch it happen. It's going to be exciting watching the Fast 8 track club going into 2022. Justin, every guest of the show gets asked 2 set questions. And here comes the first. That is, if Justin Rinaldi, coach Fast 8 track club, former Australian 800-metre record holder, could boil everything you've learnt across your own athletic journeys and now your coaching highs and lows into one piece of advice to help the listener of this show perform at their best, what is Justin Rinaldi's single piece of advice going to be?
Don't fear failing. I think a lot of athletes go out there and I think the thought of failing is in the back of their mind or in the front of their mind. I think once you can go out there and not fear failure, I'm going to commit to this race 100%, like Peter did in the Olympic final. The result, whatever the result happens, but you've not failed because you've tried to do what you set out to do. So I think don't fear failure. Just go out there and trust yourself and trust your abilities.
Gosh, that is so powerful and intriguing. How do you get an athlete to not fear failure? I know it's such a huge question, but it's got to be individual, I guess. It can be taught, I guess.
Yeah, I think it can be taught, but I think the athlete has to learn through their own mistakes they make. Like I said before, Peter Bol was not a better runner this year than he was in 2016, 2017. When he went to the Olympics and the World Championships, he was just as fit, he was just as fast, just as strong, but he just believed himself more. And I think that came from time, believing in your ability, seeing what you can actually do day in, day out in training, and then trusting in that. And that's the biggest shift he's made in his performance, is believing himself. And again, I think I spoke about my own athlete career. I don't think I actually believed in myself enough to get the results I should have probably got. And that's what I'm keen to make sure my athletes don't do. I don't want them to put in all that effort and not actually realise that their potential they've got.
Yeah, it's a recurring theme of the show, the power of belief. But as you say, you don't want to give someone false hope or expectations, but by overinflating their potential. So how do you strike that balance of instilling belief but also realism? It's a hard question.
Yeah, it is tricky. And I think it comes down to individual sessions. So if I tell an athlete to do this session and hit these times, if they're constantly doing that every session after session after session after session, and then I tell them you can run this time, then they'll believe it automatically, because they've said, well, JR's told me I've done this session and I hit the times every time he tells me to do something, I do it. Now he's telling me I can do this. Well, I must be able to do it, because he doesn't tell me to do something that I can't do. And I think the athletes know that. They know if I tell the times might seem hard that I set in training, but they know that the only reason I'm seeing it is because I believe they can do it. I never set sessions that are unrealistic or that the athletes can't finish. I think they just get that belief over time, years and years.
They accrue it over time. And Justin, finally, every guest of the Physical Performance Show issues listeners with a physical challenge for the week. Last week's featured guest on the Expert Edition, Jason Torrey, set a very grueling physical challenge, which was to run an 800 with the first 400 being 2 seconds faster than the final 200. What's Justin Rinaldi's physical challenge going to be?
Oh, it's tough. The first thing that came to mind was doing like a wall sit, just and seeing how, but I don't know why. I must have been scarred from high school and used to do that as a test because it burnt my head. But I think like a good challenge would be just for everyone, they want to get a feel of what it's like to run a marathon world record pace. If you've got access to a treadmill, just set that treadmill at 20 kilometers an hour and just sit and be safe about it. Just see how long you can run at 20 kilometers an hour for on the treadmill. And I think you'll get a real appreciation of how fast a marathoner runs.
That's a fascinating physical challenge from an 800 meter middle distance coach, but I'm smiling, but I'm also people be safe. And
be safe.
You might have just increased workloads for physiotherapists around the world there, Justin.
Well, the treadmill doesn't go up to 800 meter pace, so I've saved everyone from that.
Yeah. No, brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Justin Rinaldi, it's Sunday afternoon there, your time in Melbourne, Australia. Thank you for your contribution to the Physical Performance Show and your generosity in sharing. It's been a big year for you and your athletes. As you mentioned, we can find yourself and the Fast8 Track Club over there on socials, Fast8 Track Club, Instagram and Twitter. Anything else you just want to give a shout out to?
No, anyone in Melbourne, if you ever want to come along to watch a session or join in a session, it doesn't matter if you're a 12-year-old or a 112-year-old, maybe not that old, but feel free to come along. Like I said, we're an inclusive group. I coach a small group of athletes, but I don't mind people jumping in and even coming down and watching. So if you're in Melbourne, feel free to come along and have a chat to us. We're quite funny, I think.
Brilliant. Justin, inclusive, funny, and dedicated. Well done.
Thank you very much, guys.
So there you have it, another episode of the Physical Performance Show, and I trust and I know you enjoyed Justin's share-ins. What an inspiring coach who really walks the talk, and as you heard, takes $0 in coaching fees from his squad, who happen to be some of the planet's hottest up-and-coming 800-meter talent. Now do yourself a favour, jump over and follow the Fast8 Track Club over on Instagram and Twitter, and also Justin himself. As you heard Justin share, he shares the sessions to social media unrestrained, transparent to all, and I personally always find them very interesting. Now keep the podsies coming. That's a screenshot of the episode you're enjoying, tagging in the Physical Performance Show at Physical Performance Show on social. We will reshare those and also get a kick out of seeing those come through. Thanks to everyone taking podsies, and thanks also to people leaving ratings and reviews over on iTunes. That also means so much to us. And the reviews can be honest. Yes, we have thick skins when things can be improved. And Melter Yayam offered up some great feedback around the intro to the show, perhaps being shortened. Melter Yayam commented, "No offense, but if someone had tapped onto this podcast, they already know what it's about, so no need for grand exaggerated intros. If I have to wait 10 minutes before I get any useful information that I can use, then I give up and move on to a podcast that is able to get to the point." So Melter Yayam, thank you for your feedback. We will be endeavouring to try and shorten the introductions. And in all seriousness, if you do also have feedback on how we can improve the show, then feel free to get in touch, b.beer@pogophysio.com.au, or leave it as a rating and review. A massive thanks, as always, to the great folk who make this show possible each and every week. Daryl Misson, our audio engineer, Susan Wilkin on all things show administration, and Matthew Walding on all things show graphic design. A huge thank you to today's show partner, Polar Running Watches and Heart Rate Monitors. Now, if you are in the market for a new GPS watch or heart rate monitor, you really cannot go past Polar. I recall in the 90s, my very first heart rate monitor was, of course, a Polar heart rate monitor, and they have continued to be unparalleled in innovation in this space. And the team have offered up 15% off selected products over at the shopping cart, polar.com. by using the code TPPS. So take advantage of that generous offer. Now, it's not too late to secure your seat for the upcoming live stream event, Fueling the Endurance Athlete with Rinny McGregor, scheduled for the 23rd of October between 3 and 6 p.m. Brisbane, Australian Eastern Standard Time. Now, if you cannot make that live stream time, a post-event recording will be made available along with all of the presentation notes to all registrants following the event. Tickets are $49 Australian per registrant and are available over at pogophysio.com.au/webinar Fueling the Endurance Athlete with Rinny McGregor. Or jump over simply to the bio on our Instagram gallery. Now, coming up on next week's episode of the Physical Performance Show, we keep the highs, lows, and learnings flowing your way with an expert edition with return guest of the show, co-founder of Precision Hydration, Andy Blow, who'll be sharing around how to determine the appropriate carbohydrate ingestion amount for your racing and training. Now, here's a snippet of my conversation coming up next week with Andy Blow.
The good thing about this is, unlike in the hydration science world, whilst it's not exactly uncontentious, there's a lot more agreement in sports science and nutrition around fueling numbers. And they sort of start at the lower end with around about 30 grams of carb per hour for activities that when you start to go beyond 60 to 90 minutes, then 30 grams of carbohydrate an hour is usually very tolerable by most people and is proven to support better performance.
So be sure to be tuning in to next week's expert edition with Andy Blow on calculating your carbohydrate ingestion numbers. Until then, keep pursuing your physical best performance. I'm Brad Beer, and this has been the Physical Performance Show.